Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, regenerative back once again in conjunction with the Equaline Network, the Pan African Social Media Extraordinaire. And we're actually doing the show this evening, family, if you're here on the East Coast, by request, right? There was a brother who actually put in the comments from the previous show that he wanted us to do a reading of some of the great work of Dr. Amos Wilson. And so we're going to do that this evening. We're going to be looking at Dr. Amos Wilson's an actual excerpt from his book, seminal text, Blueprint for Black Power. We'll be looking at chapter 31 of that text, of course, the crisis of leadership. So we're going to do a deep dive there. But if you're watching, family, make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell to make sure that you are able to be a blessing to the show via Cash App, Venmo, and of course the super chat. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Hit the notification bell. You're watching, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black in conjunction, once again, with Equaline Network, the Pan African Social Media Extraordinaire, and the home of African Centered News and Information. But Sony and Garveyite, I know this show is going to be right up your alley. Appreciate you, brother, tapping in by the way of Haiti. Absolutely. Haiti, Sapase, and I know you're going to say in response, Nabule. Absolutely. Peace and blessings. Absolutely. So very quickly before we move forward, so I've been notified by a number of subscribers that you all do not get notifications of when the show is going to go live. Typically, I think you get notification 30 minutes ahead of time, 10 minutes. No one's getting notifications. I've had individuals even share that even when the show starts, they don't get a notification. I've talked to a number of individuals. It is their belief, and I guess I actually have acquiesced to their position, that it may be because of the content that we're making, that you aren't getting those notifications. Hopefully, though, you are subscribing. You are. Matter of fact, put a 1 in the chat if you get our daily Black History facts. So put a 1 in the chat if you actually receive our daily Black History chats every morning. We actually have them scheduled every day, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So put a 1 in the chat if you receive our daily Black History facts. Put a 2 in the chat if you do not. So once again, put a 1 in the chat if you receive our daily Black History facts, and put a 2 in the chat if you don't. Just want to make sure, just want to see something here, because once again, okay, so Mr. Sandman, you get the daily Black History facts. Okay, very good. Shout out to Philadelphia, the Illidale, Pennsylvania. Some people call it Pennsylvania, but we're going to accentuate the positive today. So yeah, I don't know what the issue is. I may try to send an email to, of course, YouTube and ask what's going on, because it is my belief that, particularly with the daily Black History facts, those are shorts, we should stay in the algorithm, and there should be more people who are able to pick up on the show, log in, subscribe, so on and so forth. So I'm definitely going to put that on my to-do list to make sure that we're able to find out what's going on there. One of the bigger issues, of course, family, is, we want to keep things going. And of course, we want the show to be lucrative. If it's lucrative to of course, myself and Brother Equaline, we're able to give back to the community substantially by providing material benefits for the community. So that's something that we will look into. Definitely want to once again appreciate everyone for supporting the show. Happy Pan African Wednesday to everyone. As Brother, of course, Sandman would say, Happy Pan African Wednesday. So put a 1 in the chat if you've read Dr. Amos Wilson's book, Blueprint for Black Power. Put in the 2 in the chat if you have not. So if you've read Dr. Amos Wilson's book, Blueprint for Black Power, put a 1 in the chat. If you have not read his text, seminal text, it's nearly 1,000 pages, put a 2 in the chat. Of course, it's rather exhaustive. I haven't read the entire book, but I've read several sections in depth. And actually, this section, of course, chapter 31, which is the final chapter of the text, is actually the book, the last piece of literature I have for my students when they're taking African American history 2 from 1865 to the present. This is the last piece of literature that I actually have the students read, right? When we're ending class and they're beginning to prepare for, of course, not only a final exam, but the final paper. Let's see here. I did get notification from you, but I'm not using the official YouTube app. Okay, very good. So are you on Twitter? How are you getting those notifications? I presume you are on Twitter, because I see the actual logo on your message. So whatever way you're tapping in, we definitely greatly appreciate that. once again, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. But yes, as I was saying before, chapter 31, of course, the Blueprint for Black Power. We make sure I have my students read this before this is the last piece of text that they read before they end the course and begin, of course, working on their final papers or final exam. And so I think this is something that we're going to tap into. I think there was a brother from the UK who stated that he wanted us to do a reading of some of the literature of Dr. Amos Wilson. Then, of course, and if you all haven't read this, and if you're interested in reading more literature, you can always go to the Dwayne Omawale Digital Library. Once again, I said Dwayne Omawale Digital Library. Put a post with a link to the Dwayne Omawale Digital Library under my community tab. So if you go down the community tab, a couple of months ago, actually provided as a resource. So if you don't want to purchase a book, maybe if you don't want to have a large amount of actual physical copies of books in your home, you can actually use the Dwayne Omawale Digital Library. I mean, if you are familiar with who Brother Dwayne Omawale is, but I can say Dr. Dwayne Omawale because he has a JD, he has his Juris Doctorate, he is, of course, has a law degree, and of course, he is, of course, the resident historian here at Bequeline Network and Lumumba Speaks. Your favorite Pan-Africanist, of course, your favorite historians. So definitely want to give a shout out to the Dwayne Omawale Digital Library. So let's see here. Mr. Sandman says your profile has an algorithm. I get alerts because I follow several Pan-African accounts. Your channel is heavily linked to my library. Got it. With Sony and Garvey, he says 0.5. What do you mean by 0.5? Before we, of course, do a deep dive and actually begin to look at chapter 31 of his book. Also, as you all know, the link is in the description. We will put the link in the chat momentarily, but the link is in the description if you want to tap in and be part of the conversation, but you can put the link. We will put the link in the chat momentarily. And then we're going to take a look at, of course, Dr. Amos Wilson's position, right, regarding the crisis of leadership in the Black community or the Black American, African American community, whatever term floats your boat, will work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, put the link in the chat, number one. And just make sure we get those likes up, family. Make sure we get those likes up. Happy Pan-African Wednesday. And I'm going to share my screen here. And we will get started. Okay. So as I said it before, this is an excerpt. This is chapter 31 from Dr. Amos Wilson's book, Blueprint for Black Power, a moral, political, and economic imperative for the 21st century. And of course, he starts off talking about leaders and followers. He says, in the United States of America, the primary source of the host of problems which plague the African American community is powerlessness. Powerlessness is also the source of the host of problems which plague African nations and peoples across the diaspora. So you see, he's setting the stage here by arguing or averring that the issue for African people globally, and of course, he's taking the Pan-African perspective, and we would expect it from Dr. Amos Wilson, is that the issue that Black people face globally is the lack of power politically, economically, and of course, socially. So he's quoting James McGregor Burns. He defines the primary basis of social power thirsty. I would presume, because I didn't do a background here, but I would presume. But just go back. He says, Rowley May asserted, power is essential for all living things. If we neglect the factor of power, as is the tendency in our day of reaction against the destructive effects of the misuse of power, we shall lose values that are essential to our existence as humans, right? So, of course, James McGregor Burns, I would presume, don't quote me on this, that he is a sociologist, argues power is a relationship among persons. He goes on to say to define power not as property or entity or possession, but as a relationship in which two or more persons tap motivational basis in one another. So look at some of the things I highlighted here. He argues all concerned in this chapter, this brief chapter, and I would argue the chapter isn't brief, it's 36 pages, right? So I think Dr. Wilson's been a bit facetious there, is with the intentionalities and resources of a particular class of power holders, in the i.e. African-American leaders, and their relationship to the African-American community, and whether their interaction with it leads to his empowerment or disempowerment, right? So I think this is rather, and he really goes into 3 particular types of leadership in the Black community. We would get to that right here. As you can see, I've written in false leadership, real leadership. He defines leadership as leaders and inducing followers to act for those that represent the values and the motivations, the wants, needs, and aspirations and expectations of both leaders and followers, right? So he quotes Mao here, but we're going to, of course, skip through But he argues that there's a crisis of leadership. And he says a crisis of leadership occurs when the intentions and needs of leadership are severely mismatched with those of its followers. And so we will pause there. And then a question I'm going to, of course, pose to what, right? You said you haven't read the whole book. I don't think anyone has. Like I said, it's over 1,000 pages, or nearly 1,000 pages. But the question I would ask is, do you think Dr. Amos Wilson, is correct in his assessment that there is a crisis of leadership in the Black community? Right? He advocates that there's a crisis of leadership due to there being mismatch. There's a misalignment between the intentions and needs of course, the community, between the leaders and the community. So put a 1 in the chat if you would agree with Dr. Wilson's assessment. Put a 2 in the chat if you disagree. So once again, put a 1 in the chat if you agree with Dr. Wilson's assessment. There is a crisis of leadership. There is a misalignment between the intentions and of course, needs, values between Black leadership and the Black community. So put a 1 in the chat if you agree, family. Put a 2 in the chat if you disagree. And then, of course, we will move forward. And we need our listeners from the UK to tap in, right? I think there's only, maybe 9, 10 o'clock out there. They're going to call it a night soon, call it an evening soon across the pond. But I think they're one of the 2 gentlemen who actually requested that we do a show where we're doing a reading of Dr. Amos Wilson's work. And so definitely hope they could tap in as well. So Mr. Sandman says he puts a 1. He said, you believe so. So, we're going to need you to tap in and tell us why you believe that is the case. But we will, of course, move forward. I digress. So he argues that there's a cry for new leadership. Right? He kind of, filibusters here. So I'm going to try to get to, so he talks about the complaints of current leadership. He argues the most persistent complaints the community makes concerning its current leadership that they have either been co-opted, I think most people would agree with that, by the ruling white regime, or outdated in terms of values, goals, and techniques, and are not truly and deeply committed to the welfare of the people, are self-centered, self-serving, egocentric, corrupt, out of touch with current and future realities, timid, and cannot recognize the needs of the people, or articulate those needs in ways which move the people toward their satisfaction, are intellectually inept, and are not effectively educating the masses and inspiring them to realize the enormous power which lies dormant within themselves, right? The generation of social power requires appropriate organization, tactics, and strategies, and a unifying vision or sense of mission. It requires a guiding set of ideas or an ideology whose attempted realization defines the social attitudes, relations, and institutions which together can empower a people. A people are empowered or disempowered by the guiding ideologies of the leaders to whom they pledge allegiance. So this is where we really get into when he talks about the 3 different forms of leadership. He starts off with the assimilationist, moralistic oriented leadership establishment. Of course, most of us would associate that with, of course, an integrationist frame of reference. Most of us are familiar with that with Dr. King, one Frederick Douglass, so on and so forth, right? If anyone has read W.B. Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk, seminal text, of course, in the Black canon, but also sociology. He talks about early on in this book the concept of double consciousness. I'm quite sure many of you are familiar with the concept of double consciousness, this idea of who am I? Can I be Black? Can I be African? And can I be American? Of course, those of us who are on the Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist frame of reference argue, no, you can't be, right? But those who are integrationists believe that you can, right? But there's also a third caveat, and that, of course, is the Black conservative perspective that we would get to as well, of course, in this chapter. But of course, once again, we're not going to read the entire chapter just for time, depth, etc. But we're really just going to highlight on some of the key points he makes from all 3 perspectives. So he argues, of course, that the assimilationist, moralistic leadership establishment today, this leadership establishment is primarily comprised of civil rights organizations such as the National NAACP, the Urban League, and the SCLC, right? He argues their penultimate goal appears to be that of a total psychosocial, political, economic merging of Blacks with whites to the point where the Black community will lose its ethnic identity, residential and cultural distinctiveness, self-reference, and visibility as an African people or as a community of persons of African descent. They seek to not be seen as possessing color, but to be categorized in deracialized abstract terms. And this is really something that we find in terms of the history of integrationism, this concept and idea of the goal, part of it being the greatest good is for there to be amalgamation of black and white. We find this, Frederick Douglass has talked about this. T. Thomas Fortune, who was someone who I would argue was ideologically um, nebulous, right, for lack of better words. Like sometimes he was a Pan-African, sometimes he promoted concepts of integration, right? We know he was of mixed racial ancestry. Then, of course, even Dr. King kind of speaks to this, even in his autobiography at times, right? So we tend to find this concept and idea of really, the focus is really to just lose all type of racial or cultural distinctiveness, which of course we would view as problematic. He argues, in other words, dominant whites, just Cornel West calls it the politics of conversion, right? This concept of the moral aesthetic to leadership. In other words, dominant whites must be converted or born again to the fundamental beliefs of the Christian religion, Christian charity, brotherhood, and love, or some humanistic equivalent thereof. Politically, the belief is that whites must become true believers in and doers of the word. If this moral goal is achieved, then blacks will be liberated and empowered the same as whites. Right? Wilson argued, and said, apparently based on their belief that white power over blacks is essentially a moral problem, a problem involving the inadequate enforcement of constitutional guarantees, their almost absolute faith in the idea that the merging of blacks and whites into one represents the only possible route to freedom for blacks, and their absolute faith that once these two groups are integrated, they cannot be disintegrated. A good example would be in the song "We Shall Overcome." There's of course stanza in the song where it says, "What blacks and whites together." So we see that there, of course, is validity to the claims that Dr. Amos Wilson is making here in this text. These organizations have a history of opposing and seeing the drafting and execution of such plans as racist, nationalistic, separatist, and self-segregating, particularly when it comes to what Black people engaging in culturally and racially based self-determination. So let's see here. While the Black community has acquired the right to vote, a substantial modicum of individual liberties and civil rights, it has yet to achieve the fundamentally important ability to effectively influence the government or private corporate interests to live according to the egalitarian credos and to satisfy the economic and social needs of the largest majority of Black people. This is an issue I would argue we still see today. So then he also talks about the dilemma of assimilationist leadership. The achievement of Black power involves a revolutionary confrontation with and neutralization of the white power establishment, with which the assimilation seek total acceptance. The avoidance of this very confrontation motivates the assimilation to seek refuge in the pursuit of a fantasized racist society. For assimilationists, true freedom is the freedom of a mythical racist society. A great example of this would be Torre, who was a social commentator, author. He wrote a book after Obama was elected titled "Who's Afraid of Post-Blackness?" averring that we are now in a post-racial society. Is that a reality? Absolutely not. So once again, we see that the claims that Dr. Amos Wilson made in this text, which I would argue was maybe written in the 1990s, is relevant today. So once again, we see Dr. Amos Wilson is cooking here. See, I put a star by this. The assimilations obviously have unestimated tenacity of whites to maintain the fundamental racial status quo, which has proved to be of such obvious and opulent material benefit to them, and has also provided them the exhilarating psychic benefits of racial superiority. Right. So when we talk about psychic benefits, this is one of the things that critical race theorists argue is one of the core tenets of course, racism in America, and that is that it provides psychic benefits or psychological benefit for, of course, whites in America. They do not seriously consider and prepare, apparently, for the possibility that whites will vigorously play the political and economic game, taking back with one hand what they gave with the other. A game where just as blacks are permitted to enter, the rules are suddenly changed, and blacks must protest again to have the rules changed anew. Right? So he talks about this form of invisible racism, right, where it's racially based, but then they try to make it look like maybe the issue is simply class, right? Let's see here. Yeah. So he talks about the Black neoconservative, and so my presumption is that many of you want to go in on what some people call the conservative, right, with the neoconservative. So we're going to take a look at this as well, right? And matter of fact, I'm glad that before we get started, we tend to find there are two types of Black conservatives here in the United States. One is an organic Black conservative. This is a Black conservative who has come to Black conservatism organically. Maybe it was the political values of the household. A great example of an organic Black conservative will be Condoleezza Rice. Condoleezza Rice is from Birmingham, Alabama. She's the former Secretary of State for the Bush administration, the second Bush administration. But Condoleezza Rice would be an example of an organic Black conservative. What we tend to find now are inorganic Black conservatives. That would be one, Candace Owens, the Tatum brothers, etc. And these are individuals who actually been recruited by white organizations or think tanks, and then paid to, of course, promote a racially depreciating, self-defeating narrative that, of course, engage in, of course, white deference, white racial deference, and self-loathing type of perspective. So I don't think he's going to go that deep into the difference between a organic and inorganic Black conservative, but just food for thought in terms of when we cover this section in chapter 31, that this is something that we're seeing today, that there's a lot of money to be made. A great example now will be Antoine Daniels. I had a conversation with a conversation with a sister about maybe 2 weeks ago. And she's like, man, I would love for you to get on his show and really push back because he makes some claims that, of course, are averse to facts. And this is what we find. If we remember when Antoine Daniels had his exchange with Corey Holcomb. And he says, well, say something negative about white men or critique white men. He says, no, I'm not going there. So we know that nowadays what we tend to find is this is something that's taking place because they're being paid to do so. This is the concept of the neoconservative. In fact, I saw a video. I didn't watch the video because I don't really watch his content, where we know if anyone has teenagers or if you're not under a rock, you know, it's prom season for, of course, high school students. And so a lot of parents will, you know, kind of go the whole nine. They will rent a luxury vehicle. You know, the son is wearing, you know, a nice outfit or, you know, tuxedo. The young lady has on a nice dress. And I just saw the headline on his platform was, oh, this is ghetto culture, right? So we see that there tends to be a vociferous critique of Black people, Black culture, right? But there's never critique of anything that them folks do. And this is something that we see that is extremely prevalent with neoconservatives, right? Larry Elder would be another example as well, to where, if I remember correctly, he was on the Breakfast Club. And he said that if we're going to talk about reparations, African nations need to be paying reparations, even though the African nations that exist today were the African nations that unfortunately were involved in the transatlantic slave trade many years ago, right? And so they questioned him. They say, okay, so let's just say your concept, your idea comes to fruition. African nations pay reparations. Can we then go after Western nations, United States, Canada, the Western European nations? Absolutely not. So we see there's a very strong critique, a devaluing, an aggressive attack on Black people and on African identity, but there tends to be never, absolutely never, any type of critique of course, whites and whiteness. So just something, once again, family, to consider when we talk about the difference between, when we talk about Black conservatism, and then also the organic Black conservative as opposed to the inorganic Black conservative. So there's a great book on Black conservatism. One is called Saviors to Sellouts. And then there's another great book on Black conservatism as well that I can't think of right now. But there's some great literature, scholarly literature on the history of Black conservative thought and, of course, the Black community here in the great US of A. So something to consider. So get into it. Dr. Amos Wilson, he states that this group of theorists has no significant organization or constituency in the African American community. It is nevertheless has managed to worm its way into the consciousness of the community and society in general. I would argue typically they're platformed by the white establishment. Moreover, the Black neoconservative establishment is used by the white conservative establishment as cannon fodder in defense of white racism and domination against both Black and white liberals and Black nationalists. We see that every day on Fox News. Black neoconservatism has defined itself in opposition to constant calls for assimilationists, for government intervention and largesse in the uplift of socially depressed and politically oppressed Black masses. So this is where they're leaning on that concept of course, Booker T. Washington, who is considered the most famous Black conservative, and this concept of pulling yourself up by your bootstrap. Anyone who's read Up in Slavery has done a deeper dive of course, Booker T. Washington's politics, knows that he was speaking on both sides of the mouth, and particularly he was making those type of claims to focus on what economic empowerment rather than political, because they were living in the heart of the Deep South, doing an idea of race relations, and his goal was to prevent Black people from being deleted, right? So it's just something to consider when we talk about having that critique of Booker T. Washington, because most people are unaware of the fact that he used the funds that they were able to raise, particularly in terms of from the work they did at Tuskegee, but also the philanthropic support that they received from liberal and even sometimes conservative whites in the North and South to actually hire attorneys to help W.B. Du Bois file civil rights claims with the Supreme Court, right? So just something to consider there. So let's go here. Black neoconservatives have been ably assisted in this regard for white neoconservatives, conservatives, and crypto racists due to their ideological compatibility with the values and goals of the white supremacist establishment. Right, so yes, this has led to their receiving favorable exposure in the mainstream, print, in the like electronic media, something we see today, to their being appointed to influential offices and professional positions such as heads of the EEOC, in the Civil Rights Commission in the U.S. Supreme Court under conservative administrations, and to the departmental chairs at prestigious universities. These well-paid propagandists themselves, the prime beneficiaries of precisely those maximal social, educational, and professional advances resulting from civil rights legislation. He's citing Harold Cruz here, paradoxically, right, the crisis of the Negro intellectual, paradoxically oppose the very collectivist civil rights activities which have made their occupational positions possible, right? So he talks about their central thesis, right? Their central thesis is that the current condition of Africans at home and abroad is no longer the result of historical or contemporary machinations of white supremacy, racial bigotry, and discrimination. Some Black conservatives go so far as to argue that the past oppression of Blacks and the continuing racial domination by whites, whose significance they vigorously downplay, does not provide satisfactory explanations of the current socioeconomic subordination and marginality of African Americans of Africans across the diaspora. Martin Kilson, professor of government at Harvard University, and an African American, summarizes the relationship between mainstream white conservatism and Black neoconservatism thusly. At no point in the 20th century have the claims of Black Americans for social and political parity, organized for constitutionalistic and nonviolent pressure groups like the NAACP, gained serious support from conservative leaders and intellectuals. Secular or religious support that is comparable to that which the liberal and moderate sectors among white leadership have sustained on behalf of equality of status and mobility for Blacks. From the end of Reconstruction in the 1880s to the late 1960s, American conservatives typically ignored the authoritarian and violent racial caste practices and values arrayed against Black Americans in southern states where the vast majority of Blacks live. Although American conservatives have, throughout this century, often embraced freedom movements elsewhere in the world, in Europe, Latin America, East Asia, they have always firmly resisted a proactive embrace of the Black American civil rights movement as a bona fide movement fully worthy of their support. So it is in the shadow of this dismal record of mainstream American conservatism vis-a-vis Black Americans' long and arduous quest for equality of status that new Black conservatives have emerged. So something to consider there, right? But this is something we already know, right? We agree with Cruz when he contends and goes on to establish that the conservative arguments used to explain away racism or racial discrimination as the most important cause of Black economic disadvantages are historically and sociologically of dubious validity. This is the case simply due to the accumulated material and social, political, social, cultural benefits white have inherited from the free labor of Black slaves, from their centuries-long racial domination and exploitation of Blacks. This is even if they absolutely no longer practice racial discrimination, whites will continue to enjoy an overwhelming competitive advantage over Blacks based on their near 400 years of accumulated assets alone, right? People are not born innately prepared to be what their culture needs them to be. If it is to sustain and advance itself, they must be socialized, i.e. socially conditioned, taught, and trained to be the person they must be if they are to positively contribute to the well-being of the culture and to their own personal well-being. So that really sums up the neoconservative. Let's see here. So the Black neoconservative argument rests on the very dubious assumption that one being refuted every day now that the American economy and social opportunity system will continue to prosper and expand, will offer abundant opportunities continuously, and therefore all Blacks have to do is qualify for those opportunities. They need not worry about constructing an ethnically based, African-centered economy of their own, or worry about creating their own opportunity structure for self-employment that they can depend on the beneficent white-dominated economic system to meet their needs if only they behave appropriately. In fact, they believe attempts to construct an African-centered social, cultural, political, economic system will retard Black acceptance in a white or multicultural world, a world where whites and other groups own and control their own ethnocentric social and economic systems. Black neoconservatives, have infinite faith in the propositions that other non-African ethnic groups will, in all their magnanimity, sacrifice their own ethnic interests, prerogatives, and welfare in the interest of democratic ideas, in the interest of economically raising to equality dependent and militarily weak Africans, just as the blacks have sacrificed their own vital interests in the name of fraternal egalitar. There is absolutely no historical foundation for this genocidally dangerous guiding fiction, so variously accepted by Black conservatives and assimilationists alike. So let's see here. I think we have the last group, the Black nationalist leadership, right? So he argues nationalism is an ideology of a thousand faces. While we all may have a similar sense of what it involves, we cannot all agree on any one definition of it. I would agree, as an ideological and political concept, nationalism is related to the equally unwieldy concept of nation, rooted in the prefix nat. To be born, nation implies an entity composed of persons who are born or adopted members of the people who share a common language, territory, economic life, worldview, instead of social experiences, values, thinking, and behavioral orientations. The word nation is an abstract symbol which is evoked and utilized to elicit certain concrete states of consciousness and to legitimate numerous social actions. So let's see here. There are a number of things. All right. So the primary tool is used by Black African nationalists in breaking the mental chains of subordination of African peoples to other peoples of historical and cultural rearmament. Black nationalism recognizes that European peoples' domination of Black peoples has been primarily achieved and maintained by the stringently clever falsification of the conscience of our Black peoples, by the conditioning of oppressed Blacks to behave in self-defeating, self-destructive ways. This falsification of African consciousness is the related conditioning of African misbehavior, combined with the material and social deprivations imposed on Africans under the aegis of European economic and military powers, describes the fundamental context of African American and Pan-African social, economic, social, cultural subordination, and physical peril. He talks about Black cultural nationalism, seek to restore in African peoples a knowledge and practice of their true history and culture, mainly through education, the use of various cultural art forms, the growing acceptance of the ideology of Afrocentricity, Black or Africana studies, African-centered and multicultural curricula, the proliferation of African study groups, conferences and lectures, the establishment of African cultural institutions, the growing and see what we get into here. Impact. Okay, so he's talking about this in higher education, that it's made inroads, but military retreat. See, positive intellectual vision. Black nationalism is a mass of people movement. This is part of the issue is the masses aren't able to, do not actually align with such thought. Let's see here. And he argues there needs to be a Black nationalist political party. I do recall vividly that at one point he argued that one of the weaknesses of Black nationalism was that typically individuals are verbally militant. So here we go. Verbal militancy. These so-called Black revolutionaries measure their militancy by how much Black awareness they have or how bad they can talk. Right? Verbal militancy thus replaces action, and the net result is passive non-resistance to oppression. Black culture becomes a badge to be worn rather than an experience to be shared. While fully supportive of the need of a deepening awareness of Black culture and history and the absolutely critical role it has and does play in motivating and shaping Black activism and the politics of African liberation, we concur with Allen. He's talking about Robert Allen, when he cautions that cultural nationalism can be a retreat into reaction if it is not firmly incorporated into a revolutionary political movement, which I would, of course, agree with. So we're going to stop the share there, family. Tap in, be part of the conversation. Mr. Stanman, appreciate you. Once again, the link is in the description, link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the convo. Share with me your thoughts on the work of course, Dr. Amos Wilson. That was, of course, a brief excerpt from chapter 31 of his book, Blueprint for Black Power. And that chapter 31 is, of course, the crisis in leadership. Talk to me.
Hey, how you doing, Doctor? Yeah, that was really
doing quite all right.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, that was a really in-depth chapter that you went into, and you know, I didn't have a real opportunity to really dig deep and think about all of the the subjects that the Dr. Amos Wilson addressed, it seems like that's something that needs to be thoroughly investigated and pondered upon to like really digest it thoroughly. But yeah, for the most part, I agree with the tenets of what he was talking about in terms of Black people having to integrate or assimilate towards, a European culture or white culture to be accepted into the white majority in this country. But economically, I'm most attracted to a lot of his tenets when it comes to economic prosperity for Black community by patronizing Black businesses and things of that nature. But I kind of look at economics as a mathematical thing. If you bring in more than you put out, then you'll have more income. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed in the Black culture. Consumerism, we have a tendency to spend more than we make, and that affects our ability to grow financially as a Black demographic. It's basic mathematics. If you add more than you subtract, you'll accumulate more.
Correct.
We have a tendency to want to spend a lot of money on things that we don't really need, just to say that we have it, instead of reinvesting our money.
And that's something that he mentions, of course, in that chapter, that Black people are, socialized to engage in self-defeating, self-destructive behavior. And really, he was citing, of course, the work of Dr. K.K. Kaboom and his book on cultural misorientation. He argues Black people have been socialized to engage in behaviors that are, of course, self-defeating, and one of those behaviors being, of course, materialism.
Yeah, we hear it all the time about athletes and Black athletes that become millionaires quickly, and instead of like saving their money or investing their money, they end up spending it all on partying and clothes and jewelry. And
right.
Then you see this attitude glorified in a lot of our cultural norms, like hip hop music, where all of the most popular hip hop groups, they're all frivolous with their income, spending their money on silly jewelry and clothes.
Right.
So that's like kind of the culture that's pushed, or like extravagant vehicles.
Right.
So that's kind of the culture that gets pushed to our people, and it kind of exasperates itself, where it's like a cycle of we make money, we spend money, instead of we make money, we invest money, and we grow economically.
Right. Absolutely. Snapshot, highlight your boy. I know you over there in the UK. What time is it over there?
Oh, good evening. It's 11:15.
Okay. I appreciate you staying up with
it. First of all, good evening to the panel. It's good to see that you're back on YouTube. It's been a while. And congratulations on getting married.
I appreciate it.
Good evening to you too, Mr. Sandman. So I only caught the tail end you were reading, but just going off the title of Crisis of Leadership, one of the main shortfalls that I see is the fact that, and this isn't just for America, this is here in the UK and other places as well, outside of Africa, is that we don't fund our leaders. Our so-called leaders end up being in a position a lot of the time where they're having to make coalitions with other groups and having to get financial support from other groups. And once you do that, it's very hard to keep a black agenda, I think, at the forefront and the main driving force. You then hear rhetoric from these leaders as start to talk less about black people's issues and more about issues for people of color. And when you start mixing and muddying the waters like that, yeah, you might think, and someone at first glance might think, oh well, we all got the same issues, but nah, we're not all in this. We're not in the same boat whatsoever. And some other groups are in, I don't know, a yacht. Some other groups are in a dinghy. But if the rising tide lifts too fast and you're only in a dinghy, you might capsize. And what I mean by that is, if you're not ready to take on these opportunities that are coming your way, they're just going to go to another group. So one of the things that we got to get better at doing is financially supporting our leaders so that you know, they're able to, and as the youth say, stand on business, or they're able to, like, you know, really keep the agenda you know, front and center. And then you get the opposite extreme of that, where you do get someone in that position, someone from the community, and the community support them and give them money, and then the person turns out to be a crook, or the person turns out to not deliver on what
Could
they
you
say.
provide any examples of anyone like that in our community who turns out to be a crook when we've given them a substantial amount of money that we believe will, you know?
Well, you know, you hear like all of these stories about people like, you know, the guy that got all the money for the school and then didn't open the school.
You're talking about Dr. Umar Johnson.
Yeah, and stuff like that. And I'd like to give that guy, because like some of the stuff he says, like I can really agree with and kind of listen to. But there's certain things, like when it just comes to, if we think about that school project as an example, there was no way he could run the school that he was envisioning running on the amount of money that he raised. It's just not possible. Once you break down the salary of the head teacher, the salary of staff just in a school year, you haven't even fed these kids yet. You ain't paid the electricity bill. 800 grand, I think he raised.
Right, and that's the thing.
That wouldn't even get past a semester, would it?
Schools typically aren't money-making institutions. Universities, maybe. No.
Yeah. So I mean, straight from the get-go, it's like, you know, like what did people think he was actually going to be able to deliver with that amount of money? But to his credit, you know, there has been times where he's gone around and said, you know, these celebrities that are out here, I need your support, your endorsement to get to the next stage or whatever. And maybe if he had the right amount of resources to the adequate level, maybe it would be open now. But
right, but and I would argue, if I could, or interject, that if I remember correctly, he's never provided a business plan. Right, his behavior is extremely erratic.
Exactly.
Right, so anybody with sense, I'm not going to give you a $2 million check and you out here acting crazy.
And my initial thoughts was, if he had just started, I mean, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I just think if he had just started by just opening an after-school club that could help kids with their homework, that's it. Just help kids with their homework.
Yeah, proof of concept.
Yeah, for the first
concept, yes.
Yeah, for the first 2 or 3 years, that's what you do. Do you know how much of a game changer just helping kids with their homework for those kids would be?
And then you could go and ask people to help scale what you're doing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
You know, before I had so this is about what, 10 some years ago, when my children were still young bucks. I was part of a Juma Mosi Shule, right? Saturday school, African Center Saturday school. So on Saturdays from 8 to 2, guess where I was? We were down there. We helped reading, writing, arithmetic, you know, and then we would chess. We did African history. We fed the children, right? It doesn't, but it doesn't take much. There has to be commitment there. But once again, I think you're absolutely right. Start small. You have proof of concept. Then there's scalability. And here's the other thing, you know, because I've been to the Illidale. Shout out to Philadelphia 215, Mr. Sandman in the building. Let's represent, right? there are a number, and Mr. Sandman, I hope you can tap in to verify what I'm saying, but I know this because I've seen there are a number of independent African-centered schools in Philadelphia. Am I right or wrong, Mr. Sandman?
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I even attended, an African-centered school when I was a kid, but that was, several years ago, decades ago. So, but like for me, my thought process is, I don't see Dr. Umar Johnson as a leader, mainly because, I don't think us as a Black community need a leader in terms of we're not children. We're all adults and we have brains of our own that we can think on our own. We don't need a guiding light like a Moses, so to speak. But in terms of like having an entrepreneurial mindset in terms of his idea of the school, I think it has potential. If you look at it in a long-term sense, in terms of, well, I see it as, well, anytime you have a Black institution like that and you're building young people, young boys and girls that have a positive sociological mind frame, from there you can grow that into something bigger in terms of like making African-centered businesses with some of the minds that you produce out of that institution. So it's more of a long-term investment. It's not something that you would look at today and say, okay, this is how much money that this institution would produce over the next decade. This is a generational endeavor, I would think. And I don't think it'd be something that you could really consider it being profitable in probably in his lifetime. So if his intentions is, to make money, then, with an endeavor like this, but then I don't think that's plausible. But if his intentions is legacy, then that's something different. And that
like institutions. So let me share this. I just went online. You could go to, of course, lotusacademy.org. This is, of course, an African-centered school in Philadelphia, 340 East Haines Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Phone number 215, area code 438-7500. As you can see here, the Lotus Academy was founded in 1974. So it's been around for quite some time, 52 years if my math is correct. And founded in 1974 is to lay a strong foundation for the proper academic, social, and cultural development of its students. Our independent African-centered school consists of state licensed daycare for kindergarten, pre-K children, and lower school for grades 1 through 4. And so there's a number of information on here. You can see the children, they're wearing African garb, early learning center. I mean, just absolutely, it looks absolutely phenomenal, right? Absolutely phenomenal. The children are wearing dashikis, Lotus Academy sweaters. And so this looks like definitely a place that if you are in the Delaware Valley area that you may want to be, right? Just something to consider. They have an oratorical contest where students are speaking. We got, Franz Fanon taught us that the mastery of language force on remarkable power. They had to pass it. So you see these students are wearing kente stoles when they finish at the Lotus Academy. Seasonal celebration, which is very important, something I've done with my children. So definitely, I can say, I would argue that if he wanted, he could have already, of course, had worked with the Lotus Academy to do some of the work that he says that he wants to do. But once again, family, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this link in. I'm going to put the link to the school in the chat. So if you want to check out the Lotus Academy, you definitely can. It's in Philadelphia.
Now, 800 grand that he raised would go a long way to support an organization like this.
Mm-hmm.
Or on this level. We had Saturday schools here when I was coming up, but the downside was a lot of the people of my parents' generation didn't financially support it. And the one family that was running it, they kept having to go to like the local authority, the town councils and stuff for funding, not getting funding from their own community, even though they're doing not just your maths and your English, but they're giving you that cultural nourishment, that identity, that stuff about our history that we're not learning in schools, but not enough people from the community financially supported it, and eventually it closed down.
Right. And very quickly, one of the things I want to mention about the Lotus Academy is actually accredited. Dr. Umar Johnson stated on the video that his school would not be accredited. And so there's no benefit of the child going to the school. They won't get receive an accredited education. So that means that if they go, just say his school, just for sake of conversation, goes K through 12. You go through the school K through 12, you graduate. You couldn't go to what? You couldn't join the military, even though we wouldn't want you to, right? You couldn't go to a trade school or university because, as he stated, he doesn't want the school to be accredited. He wants it to be 100% independent.
So what? So the students would come out with no qualifications whatsoever?
Exactly.
Well, what's the point of that?
Exactly. So that's why I said I would make the argument. I'm going to say this right here, April 22nd, 2026, on LumumbaSpeaks.com in conjunction with Equaline Network, that the whole school concept is a grift. It's 100% a grift. In fact, there's a good brother of mine, I'm not going to put his name out there, but he's a college professor, but he had his daughter in an African Center online school for an entire year. And he had to take her out because after that entire year of coursework, they realized that the school wasn't accredited. And I remember his daughter, which I know personally, was extremely upset that she just lost an entire year of school.
Of course.
Yes. So the schools have to be accredited. And if it's not accredited, that means they could be in there just doing whatever they want.
Well, actually, there's workarounds that accredited issue, being that, a kid can get accredited education online. He could have used the institution as a building for them to do their online studies, get their accredited degrees or what have you, and along with getting their accredited degrees inside of the building, they will also do extra curricular education that will be centered based on his curriculum. That's what I'm gonna. I mean, if I was a parent of a kid that I allow go to his school, that's what I would be looking for. Okay, so you're gonna have my kid come to your school, and my kid isn't going to be able to pass grade 1 through 12 because it's not an accredited education. Well, yeah, I'm having a problem with that. You can't provide my kid with education necessary for them to get a diploma. Well, then I can't take my kid to your school. But if you provided something extra, like a institution that will help my kid study from online courses inside of your building, well, that might be something I consider if I consider, your institution trustworthy.
Yeah, but even before you get to that point, Mr. Sandman, you got to ask yourself the question is like, what is the vetting process of people who donated in the first place before they realize I'm going to part with my money to support this thing? Because if they read the detail and it's like, well, hold on a minute, kids that go there aren't even going to get an education, so what's the point? And I think maybe one of the things that we need to think about, like, because I know we said, oh, maybe not thinking about a leader as a particular person, but you're always going to get people that want to follow behind someone. Like, what is the vetting process that we go through or that we scrutinize the person under to know that, there's less chance of this thing here being a grift, or this person really just not doing what's right? And I don't know that enough of us have a stringent enough or strict enough mold to know or process to know how to vet a person.
And that's the reality in the Black community, right? These grifters, they know that if you tell them what they want to hear, they will not hold you accountable. You're beyond reproach, right? There are videos where Umar Johnson is stating that only women can work at the school, and that if they engage in behavior that he deems unbecoming, which is an arbitrary designation, he would take them into his room and he's going to paddle them. He's put this information out on YouTube.
Oh man.
Yeah. So this isn't conjecture. Matter of fact, I'm gonna see if I can pull it up right now. But this is what we're dealing with. This is a problem. Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't want my kids being influenced with a person with that type of character that sexualizes women in front of them. I think that's too young for the minds of our children. So yeah, that's a big red flag.
Yeah, but do you know what else as well though? If he's acting like that and saying stuff and doing stuff like that, and he's flying under the name Pan-African or Pan-Africanist, that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, family. I can't. I have to try to find this video. But yeah, it is a major problem.
So, in terms from your perspective, Dr. Lumumba, like, what do you think like the vetting process should be, or what do you think? Like when it comes, so actually no, when it comes to like crisis of leadership, what do you think are the main issues?
Well, I would agree with Dr. Amos Wilson's proclamation. So the argument I make is that the biggest issue, particularly in terms of a Black nationalist, Pan-African frame of reference, right, is the inability to build institutions or the lack of institutions to serve the needs of our people. I've consistently articulated my belief. Most of our people will go run to the mosque, the church, the synagogue, the temple. Yeah. One, because this is all they know, right? When we're showing up, we're trying to provide a perspective that typically they're unaware of. The second issue, in my opinion, is those institutions tend to provide resources at some base level. I give you all a brief story. I was dating a sister from South Sudan probably about 13, 14 years ago. And we went to a wedding in Pittsburgh. We drove all the way from Ohio, went to Pittsburgh for this wedding, South Sudanese wedding. But it's at this white church. So as you can imagine, it's got me feeling some type of way, right? This is the experience, right? I'm like, what the French Stones is going on, right? So we get there, and I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom. And I go to the bathroom, and first off, in the ceremony, these white people got them singing, "I love Jesus, Jesus the best thing to me," in Swahili. I'm like, what are they saying? She's like, you don't want to know, right? So I remember she told me that, like, you don't want to know, right? So, because I can speak a little Swahili, but not enough to where I'm fluent. So I go to the bathroom, and there are brochures regarding for all of the resources that they were providing to our brothers and sisters who were coming from the continent. So I said, this is the issue right there. They've captured the heart in the minds of the people by addressing their material needs. That simple. It was that simple, right? Yeah, but Dwayne and I, we had an exchange. You said if we want to move people off the religion thing, you have to address the needs of the people. We know this. A lot of churches, they have soup kitchens. They provide sanctuary for people who are homeless. What do? They're going to give you a meal, a place to sleep. But before you do that, listen to the sermon. People listen to the sermon. Why? Because what? They have something that I need. Right? And then people then associate their goodwill, not with Pan-Africanism, not with an African-centered frame of reference or socialization or pride on who you are as a people, but what? That deity or that religion. So that's what we're up against. Now, I had an exchange with Brother Dwayne about this, and a rather strident exchange with him. And he says, well, churches will work. And I said, yeah, but we got to put this in context. They have an institutional advantage. They have a brick and mortar institution. They're tax exempt. And they're telling people what they want to hear. And they have doting parishioners who are going to show up every Sunday and give them money. That is a reality, right? We have it documented. We have pastors, preachers, pulpits, bishops, whatever you want to call them, evangelists, televangelists who have impregnated teenage girls, and people still show up every Sunday and give them money. You have individuals who are caught committing crimes. People still show up every day, give them money. You have individuals who have been charged and convicted of abusing their spouses. People still show up every day and give them money. Right? So I said, that's the institutional advantage that they have. We don't have that luxury of having people who are mindless, for lack of better words, who are going to show up every Sunday, listen to me on YouTube, and give me 10 grand. Give me 10 grand an episode. It's not going to happen. Right? If I was getting 10 grand an episode, shoot, I have a building around the corner. Right? If after school, we have a gym in there, all type of stuff. So I say we have to put that in context. Right? And part of the goal, typically in these religious institutions, is to promote that. Right? So we have to look at that. But yes, do we need to build institutions? Absolutely. When I was working with the Dayton
of YouTube.
Hold on, I need to mute you, Brother Sandman. When I was working with the Dayton Africana Elders Council, one of the reasons I left the Dayton Africana Elders Council, in which I was a member of the African Village, was because they did not want to build institutions. They didn't want to engage in institution building. They said, well, we could just give advice. I said, but I don't need no advice. I'm a freaking doctor. Right? Yeah. Right? Yeah. Said, that ain't gonna help. That doesn't help anyone. We have to build institutions. That means we need to put our money in the pot. We need to practice susu. We need to practice ujamaa. And then what? Yeah. We need to go obtain some property. And they did not want to do that. So that's what we're up against. That is what we're up against.
Okay.
Yeah. That's part of that crisis of leadership. And part of it isn't just having the ideological fervor. Part of it is the commitment, and that commitment it has to be long term. Right? I mean, I've been doing this YouTube channel. I think I started in 2020, so this may be 6 years. I don't make any money off of this. In fact, I put more money in than I get out. You know how I know this? Because I did my taxes last week.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a commitment because I know I'm addressing issues that are pertinent to the community. Right? And I've had people tell me, like, brother, can you please continue to post, because you're providing content from a particular perspective that we typically don't have access to.
What do you think is the most important institute that we would need? The first one.
Man. Well, I would say number one, education. Right? Dr. Amos Wilson talks about socialization, a proper socialization. I would argue the number one institution we would need is, of course, education. That right there.
Before a bank.
I'm sorry?
Before a bank.
So yeah, you got me there. Yeah, so I would say either a bank or a school.
Right.
A bank or a school.
Because the thing with the bank is, if that did get going, we could start getting stuff happening a lot sooner. Because obviously with education, you've got to wait for
you had the funding. You had the funding.
Yeah, and get it up. But there's a place just outside London that I went to called Southall.
Okay.
And it's a large Sikh community, right? So the minute you step off the train, you see a place of worship, you see supermarket, you'll see a banks, an Indian bank, you'll see colleges, you'll see doctor surgeries, like all the tenants of a community that could be self-contained. Yeah, the supermarket stock food from that part of the world. They've got their own places of worship. They've got, when you go into the doctor surgery, almost everyone working there is from the same culture and religion. Like that could be its own self-contained unit, but there isn't, that I know of in the UK, there isn't a black equivalent to that anywhere. But at the heart of it was a bank that I think a lot of the local traders could go to and probably easily get a loan for their businesses a lot easier than walking down the main high street down to some sort of commercial bank. And I just think a bank or some sort of way to get economics rotating would go a long way for our independence, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with you there. I would agree with you there. So, because as we know, what is done by African people must be done. What is done for African people must be done by African people. And we know Thomas Sankara taught us that whoever feeds you imposes their will upon you. So we definitely don't want to be in a situation in which we're dependent non-Black or non-African largesse, particularly financial largesse, right? Because they then tend to be able to control what you do and how you do it.
And Neely Fuller Jr. talks about 9 areas of activity, like the
Right.
politics, the war, I can't remember them all off the top of my head. But
Absolutely.
I'm just kind of wondering if those sort of arenas, it's almost like we need to find people in our group that are have a detailed knowledge in some of these areas of activities, because the way he kind of describes it is they are activities that someone somewhere on the planet is always engaged in. And I wonder if that's a little bit of a thing that can help us like plot a course to how we start to gain as you say, gain a competitive advantage in some of these areas by kind of using that as like the foundational blocks to kind of like build up with. But the problem I have is I don't know any other Pan-Africanists in real life. Like most people that I talk to are online. I wouldn't know where to go to meet them, to network and that sort of stuff. But I just feel like we could get one sort of institute sort of started, or at least people around the table talking about how it might come into fruition. That would be a big step, because I don't think we can keep deferring things to the next generation, man, because we're going to be, the way the world's going and stuff like that, we got to get competitive really quickly.
Absolutely. And part of it is, and I would agree once again with Dr. Amos Wilson's position that one of the reasons these things are so hard is because our people have been socialized to work against our own best interests. I mean, it's just the reality. I mean, I gave an example to a brother. I was at the gym, getting my body by Lumumba in. You know how I get down. And we were talking about self-governance, right? This prevaricating myth that was created by, of course, anti-Black racists, that Black people have an inability to govern oneself. And I said, well, it's very easy for people to lack the ability to govern oneself. I said, if you take a group of people who were governing themselves, remove them from that environment, right? Deny that particular generation the ability to govern oneself, right? And then take the progeny of that generation that's been captured and deny them the ability to learn self-government, right? So that cultural memory isn't being passed down. In 2 generations, now they don't know what to do. Right? So, for example, my father knows how to work on a car, change the oil, change the tire, all types of stuff, right? He taught that to me. If I didn't teach that to my son won't have that knowledge or ability. Then people say, but then you're going to have one of those anti-Black misandrists say, well, see, this young man doesn't know how to work on a car, and ain't ish. Right? So it's very easy. And that's done purposely, right? We know the schools we go to promote a rather Eurocentric curriculum. This is something that Charles Mills, book, The Racial Contract, and Dr. Carter G. Woodson talks about this in his book, Miseducation of the Negro. And of course, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who of course is now an ancestor, talks about this as well. And when he talked about the cultural bomb of colonial education in of course, East Africa, right? So we face this everywhere. And so I would argue, yes, financial, absolutely. And then education, of course I said education because that's my wheelhouse, right? Education, socialization, it absolutely matters. I could vividly recall when it particularly comes to African-centered socialization. Of course, I was in school, I'm learning these things, but I still haven't put them to the test, right? So I recall vividly, my daughter, I believe, was maybe 4 or 5 years old. So in my household, we don't do Valentine's Day, we do Black Love Days, right? And just a quick shout out, family, tomorrow is my parents' 49th wedding anniversary. 49th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations to them.
Right? Yes, so when we talk about Black love, I grew up seeing it, right? 49th and wedding anniversary. So what ends up taking place is, instead of Valentine's Day, we do Black Love Days. And so for Black Love Days, I bought my daughter Marcus Garvey's red, black, and green flag. And she was running around the living room yelling, I got the flag Marcus Garvey made. I got the flag Marcus Garvey made. You would have thought she won Wimbledon. The way she was, right? And I told her mother, I said, I told you this shit really works.
Mm.
It really works. You can actually raise a child and have a healthy view of who they, even in an inherently anti-black society such as America, the UK, etc. Another example, my daughter is 16 years old. She has never straightened her hair. She's never gotten a perm, and she's 16.
That's good.
Right? You can actually do these things. You can, if you put the time in. And there are all types of children's books that talk about I love my hair, positive socialization. I mean, you can actually do it rather quickly. It's not difficult, right? You just have to be intentional, and then of course model the behavior yourself. I can recall vividly when my son was maybe 4 years old, and I used to always buy these little dashikis for him. And it's crazy. This boy was a toddler, and I'm buying him $40, $50 dashikis, right? And, so he's going to school. At the time, his mother had him going to school in the suburbs, so it's a predominantly white school. And he goes into the classroom and all excited because he got his dashiki on. And he goes to the globe and tells the teacher, "Hey, yeah, I come from Africa. Look, see, this is Africa right here on the world map." Da, 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 right? So he was extremely excited and proud of who he was and where he came from.
Oh, that's great, man.
Yes, and that was when he was 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
So you have to do the work, but we know a lot of people. Oftentimes, that there's a huge load, right? Parenting, raising children, working, etc. And so I would tell people, if you have the capacity, opportunity, you should have your children go to an African Center school like the Lotus Academy. Like I said, there are a number of African Center institutions that are accredited in, of course, the greater Philadelphia area. I would argue, and just to kind of bring this roundabout and land my plane, if Dr. Umar Johnson was a serious individual, he would be working with one of those schools himself.
Yeah.
Or at least, at the very least, as you suggested, starting a pilot program, serving the needs of those children, right? Having proof of concept, and then of course being able to move forward, and then scale that program initiative that he has.
Mm. And do you think it's key that it is 100% funded by the community, or do you think it could still run if you did draw down some government grants and stuff?
So my position is this: I was affiliated with an organization I created an African Center school here in the Dayton, Ohio area. It was the W.B. Du Bois Academy, and so the charter schools was like a big thing back in the day here in Dayton about 20 years ago. And the issue was we brought in a brother who was, he had the credentials. This is before I even had an associate's degree to run the school. And he had, of course, when you're a principal, you have control of the budget. And he took that money and ran off and we got maybe about $350,000 because we were getting funding from the state to start the charter school.
Mm.
So, but the issue is, if you have a charter school, you can get a lot of funding. Sometimes you could get over 1.2 million. Like a lot of times here in Dayton, Ohio, even newspaper articles substantiate this. A school would say they got 400 or 500 some students, when in reality they may only have 20. And then the state would give them maybe $1.5 million. And then they have a skeleton staff in there, maybe one secretary, one person acting as a principal, and maybe 3 teachers. And then they're splitting that money. And everyone's getting off like a fat cat. I mean, there was a documented case where they were getting off like a fat cat. Like with one of the principals, their listed home address was 3 hours from where the school was located.
Flipping hell.
Yeah. So the reality situation, but he says, okay, I want to be completely independent, but you could get the resources and funding and really open the school and still have an African Center curriculum because it's a charter school.
Mm.
So I think the issue is he simply doesn't want to deal with any regulations because someone's going to be holding him accountable. If the school is completely independent and not even it doesn't even have any accreditation, he doesn't have to answer to anyone.
Mm. See, now I know this might sound a little bit controversial, but if it was me, I would take the charter grant because I would see that as reparations, because now that money is being invested in our community, in Black people's community, and at least you get started, you get it going. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's what I said. Let's say he only has 15 students and their age grades 6 through 8, right? But you get 1.5 million. I mean, you could probably bring in a teacher and pay her 110K a year, and I guarantee
Yeah,
you, she's going to teach her. He or she would teach their behind off for that much money,
absolutely. And even if
right?
the first year was a bit ropey or so, people are going to give you some wiggle room because you're still working things out. You know what I mean? Like it would just get started.
Yeah. And Malcolm X even talked about the process and when they were creating the independent school to the Nation of Islam. He talked about this in his autobiography, right? Muhammad University. He says, maybe that first year or two, the children probably they sacrificed for the greater good for subsequent generations because after a while we were able to really hone in on how to properly educate, how to run
Yeah,
a functional
yeah,
positive school culture, so on and so forth. But the commitment has to be there in the way he's running things. And of course, this isn't a referendum on Dr. Umar Johnson. That's not what the nature of this live is about. But the conversation came up. I just don't think he's someone that, that you can take serious.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was just using him as an example, and I was just trying to say, like, some of our leaders, they need to be able to be independent with the funding and the resources coming from us. But then sometimes you get it on the opposite end when we do give money to someone and then they turn out to like just not end up delivering or and stuff like that. And it's a question around like how do we vet stuff? Like there's another guy on YouTube that I've been listening to from time to time. He's like a pocket watcher kind of guy, but he talks
Yes.
about like people that are scamming and things like that. And
Yeah,
one
I
of
know
the
you're talking about Cam James.
No, I don't think that's his name.
Okay.
He's got glasses.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. He's in Georgia. Yeah,
Oh,
he's in Georgia.
but one of the
And
things
because I actually reached out to him via, I actually emailed him. We've had a correspondence via email.
okay, because one
Yeah.
of the things that he put on my radar is that sometimes some of these guys and girls, when they're talking in like street language when
Hmm.
you're expecting to be talking about real estate or
Yes.
financial advice and stuff like that, but they keep bringing in like street lingo or street kind of tactic and that, and it should be a red flag, but a lot of people like I don't know, but maybe they look at it as someone
He's
who's
being
speaking,
relatable.
yeah, and stuff like that, and a lot of the times from the examples that are shown on his channel, these guys tend to be crooks, you know.
Yeah. And is this who you're talking about? This brother here?
Nah, that's not the guy.
Okay.
The guy I'm talking about is I think his name's Jason Thornton, JT.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's called Pocket Watching with JT is the one I'm talking
Yes,
about.
I'm talking about, yes.
Yes,
I
yeah,
know,
but
yeah,
yeah,
I know
but he
him as well, yes.
yeah, so he just has like all of these examples and stuff, and it's just such a shame because sometimes there's a real movement behind some of these people, and then when they end up being crooks or they end up like not living up to it, like it just kills the whole momentum behind whatever was built up behind them and stuff. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we keep the focus on the main thing here. The black community does have an issue with, at least in America, with youth or black youth getting involved with gangs and crime. So what's the alternative? If it isn't an African-centered school or institution that the young men can go to, is the alternative for them to join the Bloods or the Crips
Well, no,
or the
I would
Vice
argue,
Lords?
no, I would argue, and I think that's a great question. Then at the very base level, you create some type of program initiative in the community. If you don't have an institution, right? For example, in Dayton, Ohio, there was something called the Montgomery County Fatherhood Initiative, right? So this initiative, they didn't actually have an institution. So there was a brother who was cool with some pastor where we could just meet in the basement of the church and really help brothers deal with issues in terms of getting access to their children. We know a lot of brothers, and even not people who weren't brothers, were dealing with issues of parental alienation. So sometimes it's not even having an institution, but maybe partnering with an institution, saying, "Hey, this is our goal. We want to do this X, Y, Z," and then just oftentimes asking if they're able to provide you some grace to use their space. For example, here in Dayton, there's a church that every year we have one of these 7 days of Kwanzaa at a particular church here on the west side of Dayton, right? And so sometimes you're just partnering with institutions, but you have some type of programming that you believe is beneficial to a particular demographic in our community.
Also, I noticed that Dr. Amos Wilson, he had a doctorate degree in psychology as well as sociology, I believe. With Dr. Umar Johnson supposedly having a doctorate degree in psychology, what do you think is the viability of a black psychiatrist influencing the youth if he has good intentions? Do you think he would be his initiatives would be more potent for the development of young black youth because he would be able to manipulate their minds and their thought process more than, let's say, just a regular educator would?
Well, yeah, I would. So there's a good brother. That's a great question as well. So there's a brother who has he was a mentor of mine. He got his PhD in psychology. His dissertation was on the fact that even if you have good intentions and you are a therapist or psychologist or a psychiatrist, if you aren't providing treatment from an African-centered frame of reference, you're doing the person harm, right? You're doing your patient harm. So I would argue yes, but the issue is I wouldn't argue manipulate the minds. We need someone who's going to develop the young people's minds, right? The goal is for us to be mentally smart, not just simply physically smart. And so, and part of my work, particularly higher education, part of my work focuses on students developing the intellectual, emotional, and psychological armor needed and necessary to be able to be successful in a vehemently anti-Black society.
Now, isn't it interesting that a lot of these guys that end up in the criminal justice system find their way to Islam?
I'm sorry?
Like a lot of what I've noticed is there's a lot of black guys here in the UK, right? And I know it's true in America as well, that when they're in the system and they're trying to get rehabilitated, and a lot of them find their way to Islam.
Yes, but a lot of that has to do with protection, right? When guys are behind the wall, unfortunately, typically they're going to link up either with a gang or an Islamic group for protection.
So it's not anything spiritual or anything like that.
No, I mean, for some people it may be, but typically it's for protection. And you're talking to someone who's been behind the wall before. So I'm speaking from experience.
Right.
Yeah. For most people, they're going to connect with that because it's for protection reasons. Because typically, so we talk about way back in the day, let's say 30 years ago in the 90s, where they really was going after you really had booty bandits in the joint, right? And the prevailing knowledge on the yard was if you try to grape someone who's Muslim, those Muslims will delete you.
Okay.
Right? That they were known for not engaging in that type of nefarious sexual behavior. But individuals who may be part of gangs, I mean, we all saw the movie South Central, where the brother was like, man, he's thinking about leaving Deuce. He says, but don't come back trying to suck your way into Deuce when those aliens pump you in your behind.
Okay, no.
Yeah, so even the gangs, they engage in that type of sexual predation, right? Of a way of punking someone, emasculating them, taking their manhood. But the Muslims are known for having a zero tolerance policy when it comes to that. So individuals oftentimes will cosplay, right, as Muslims for protection.
Yeah, well, Malcolm X found Islam in prison as well.
Right, but that's because the nation was actually, the nation was doing active recruitment at that time.
Right. Yeah, so that's true. You know, a lot of I mean, there is the Muslims have a lot of power inside the prison system. Yeah.
But the
I even have a family member who's in the federal prison system now that I support. And I asked him, like, what's going on? And he tells me, like, yeah, there's a lot of Muslims out here, and they do, like, have a lot of influence.
Hmm.
But the through
Yeah,
line is they offer something.
Tangible, which is protection.
Yeah, yeah. And I think any institute that we try to set up under a Pan-African umbrella has to offer
Something
members
tangible.
something tangible.
Yep, absolutely. It has to offer something tangible. If not, and that is the challenge, because it's far easier for religious institutions to offer something tangible because they're tax exempt and they have a large congregation. I mean, think about it. We're on this live and we have 10 people watching. Even the smallest church probably is going to have 40 or 50 parishioners.
Yeah. You see, now it's got me thinking that any kind of institute that we need to set up would benefit from having a nation or an international recognized nation behind it. I don't think it's enough, especially now in 2026. I don't think it's enough for Black people in Western societies to just have stuff locally or just stuff in those Western societies. I think there has to be some sort of link back to either the continent or a Black nation in the Caribbean or somewhere where it's a Black. I think it has to have a country or something behind it, because if you've got a country behind you, you've probably got more potential to be able to open a bank or open, especially when it comes to business, some sort of line of importation and exportation and things like that. I don't know, in order to be able to compete against other groups, which is what we're doing, I don't see how we do it without something like that behind. I don't think we can catch up under the current guise of just trying to do it within America or just trying to do it in the UK. There has to be some sort of to a country. But it's getting kind of late here, so I'm going to have to sign off. But I'll catch you on the next one, right?
Absolutely. I appreciate you for tapping in. And so, yeah, I'll give you and Brother Sandman final thoughts, and then, of course, we're going to call it an evening here as well.
Yeah, I would just say that I could go. Oh, yeah, I would just say, yeah, it was interesting that you brought up the bank topic earlier, and I think that is a interesting dynamic that could be utilized in the Black community. I think the power behind the banking system, particularly in the West or in the United States, is the Federal Reserve controls the interest rates. So if we want to loan out money to potential Black business owners, or loan out money for young Black people to buy homes, then that's kind of controlled by the Federal Reserve and them controlling the interest rates, and also is also controlled by a lot of credit bureaus that are also ran by public institutions as well. So I think, like, if we were to venture into that endeavor, I think that it's important for the Black dollar to be backed by African countries that could back their dollar by control of their own natural resources. We have an abundance of land and natural resources in Africa, and if the Black dollar could be backed or as collateral with African countries, then I think the potential of us opening up banks in the United States would really have a lot of juice behind it.
Yeah, I definitely think a bank is the way forward, and we could look at models that are covered like in other parts of the world. Like I know that, like, from what I've heard, like in the Middle East or whatever, when they borrow money, they don't charge interest. You get it and you pay back what it is that you borrowed, and that might actually help a lot of young businesses, Black businesses, where they'll still have to pay back what they've borrowed or what they've taken out, but they're not charged such a predatory interest rate, or they're not charged an interest rate at all. They just have to pay it back over a certain amount of time. But I think I think if we get an economic engine behind this thing, it definitely will go a long way to propel our people forward.
Yeah, the people in the Middle East, they have that surplus of the oil that they can,
Yeah.
they can loan out money to. And we have some oil. We have a lot of oil in West Africa. So yeah, if we could get like some countries to back us, and then you have the power of the American dollar behind it. I mean, if we could be backed by African countries and their natural resources, and then take the strength of the American economy to like multiply that dollar that's backed by the collateral of African countries, then I think there's a lot of potential in that.
Definitely. Agreed.
Yeah, or even in the European economy as well.
Yeah.
All right, family. I appreciate everyone tapping in. Make sure you be a blessing to the show. Make sure you hit the Cash App, Venmo, and of course the Super Chat. Until next time, y'all know what to do. Always bet on black. Peace. Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, here at Lumumba Speaks, we always bet on black. Peace.